So Cheryl, it's been a long time since we first spoke, and I tell you that was one of a very very positive and serendipitous moment in my life. A friend of mine, and there'll be a different part of the conversation here with one of our guests on the webinar today, had a cricket farm, and I knew her well. We were talking quite a bit about the cricket industry. I was fascinated with why bearded dragons needed a cricket a certain size, and how these little tiny crickets called a pinhead would seek out water to drown themselves, and just how difficult it is to keep these little critters alive. But I was fascinated by them, and I put a nice post up on LinkedIn about that, and you contacted me out of the blue, and you said, hey, come on, you're playing with crickets at this point in time. Mealworms is really where things are. I'm like, really? I'm first of all, I was fascinated by insects to begin with, but number two, I'm like, who is this forward person who actually saw me out to set the record straight on the insect species of choice? And so we struck up many conversations over the years, interacted on multiple levels, and you've gone through quite a bit since I've known you. But the point in time I don't know is all the stuff that led up to me knowing you. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, kind of give a little bit of your background, and
Yeah,
kind of how you came to be who you are. Then we'll delve a little more into the business itself.
yeah,
And thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. So I have been with Mealworms since 2018. Prior to that, my educational background is math, biology, and but I never really taught biology. It was mostly math. I have a master's in school counseling, so it lends itself perfectly to raising mealworms. Who would have ever guessed? But what I do have in my background that probably was the decision maker was I grew up on a farm in Northeast Nebraska, and the older I got, the more I missed being around animals of sorts, and that agricultural background kind of called to me. And so I wanted to get back involved in something involving animals, and it just seemed like insects was the perfect fit, which I would never have guessed that at one point. But and so I was picky with the insect I chose. I
Well,
from
let's
grew
go
up on
back to
a
that first name. It
yeah,
could have been poultry, it could have been
right,
cattle. I mean, you
right.
chose it, you intentionally went somewhere. So what was your decision making in going there?
Well, with cattle, I mean, we had cattle and hogs on the farm, and so cattle, you're when you're away from them, you kind of you need to have an aptitude for how to handle them, and I had lost that, and that's a prime opportunity to get hurt when you're not used to working with large livestock, large animals. And so that was out of it. Hogs, I'm pretty sure when we raised hogs, that is probably why I did not have a date in high school. I don't think it was because I didn't have a charming personality. I think it was because I probably was like Pigpen from Peanuts, wherever, literally Pigpen from Peanuts, wherever I went, there's probably a little lofting of hogs following me. And so it's like, I did not want that smell. That was for sure. Poultry, I really did not know anything about chickens at all. And I just want to do something different. I'm a little quirky, I guess, and I wanted to do something that was unique and where I could see a potential for it growing. And like I said, I've just kind of fit my quirky personality to try to explore something. Bug eater foods was using cricket protein for a food product line. So I reached out to one of the founders of that institution and then said, okay, from the farm, I do not like any insects that I associate with death and decay in my mind. I did not want anything that could fly and bite or fly and sting because I literally had enough of that growing up on a farm. And I had enough opportunities where crickets or grasshoppers would jump on me from walking through pastures or whatever, and it just scared me. And so I just really wanted something that was simple and would stay put. And Andrew kind of alluded to this at one point where, she said, well, then you want mealworms because, they will, if you keep them in their containers and their plastic containers, they're not going to go anywhere. And I thought that sounded wonderful. And I mean, for someone that really has no love of insects, the fact that I end up raising millions of insects, mealworm larvae is just bizarre. But that's kind of how I got there. And the little guys have grown on me, and they really have. I've enjoyed it. And honestly, the days and the weeks go by so quickly that it doesn't even seem in some days ways like work for me, which I guess that tells me I'm in the right profession finally. I
Well,
finally
not
figured out what
only
I want to be.
well, not only you, but everyone listening to this. I mean, what an inspiration. So, I mean, I assume there's going to be some young farmers just like you, a young Cheryl out there that says, "Oh my gosh, I want to raise mealworms." So, you figured out mealworms. What do you go to extension? Like, where do you go to even figure this stuff out? I mean, is there any knowledge
Yeah,
base? I mean, you must have learned a lot by trial and error, I'm sure.
100%. And in Nebraska, the protein state where we export so much beef, pork, poultry, protein, that no one in the state could really help us. So we had to, Google. This is 2018, where you had to Google, how do we start? Where do we start? Um, and the key was at that point, I had two other women co-founders. And so we were women, a team of three women that co-founded this crazy idea of let's raise mealworms. And each of us had our forte, with it. One was kind of the analyzer, the data kind of a person as much as we could. One was kind of the business savvy, and I was the customer development kind of person and the idea person. And so we complemented each other, three women living in three different cities, but made a company work. This is pre-COVID and all that. And so we persevered, and to go back to what you had said, Andrew, with young people, we one of my co-founders was very involved in Future Farmers of America, as I was also involved in Future Farmers of America. And so we gave a lot of talks and a lot of tours to local FFA chapters because we wanted to get awareness with the younger people who want to pursue agribusiness or ag, but maybe do not want to necessarily be on their parents' farm. But what could they be involved in that's involved in agriculture, similar to what I'm doing? And so that's kind of my interest, is to how can we promote this in other ways to the next generation.
Well, let's think practically. I mean, is this something I know I've got some mealworms. I call them mealworms in my living
Mhm.
room, but it's a small little plastic container. I mean, for you to grow a company from an idea to selling to major brands, I mean, there was a lot of sort of steps involved in there. So where did you
Mhm.
get your initial stock from? Were there special genetics you had? What was your feed stock? I'm sure keeping these things alive in Nebraska wasn't the easiest thing. It's
Mhm.
not Florida.
Yeah. I mean, we would, of course you have to start somewhere. So we'd have, order from what are now our competitors, and kind of what has been our competitor, we're now kind of supplying. So it's kind of an interesting circle there. But we had to order in, and when we would order in, we would say, okay, here's how they arrived, and this is how we're going to, because we were planning always, originally it was supposed to be like a food industry, but then we realized there was kind of a cringe factor involved yet with the insects. And so we said, okay, low hanging fruit, we got to get money coming in, is the live industry. And so that's where we have remained at to this day. But we would order it in and we take notes. Okay, this is how they arrived to us. This is good. This was not good. We looked at box sizes, and so we had to kind of we had to really start from ground zero. And so we took one box size, and now we have three different box sizes. And so we had to figure out shipping logistics, all of that. We did go through an accelerator back in 2018, but we were not like the others. Everyone else was pretty much app based, and we were actual product based. And they were saying you've got to sell, got to sell, got to sell. And we said, you don't realize one customer could wipe us totally out. And so we've got all these other things we need to figure out first ahead of time. And so, it took a good 6 months to kind of figure out some of those logistics. In the meantime, we're trying to raise them and grow them and figure out what works and what doesn't work, and what's an easy way for us to handle these guys, and with the manpower, the limited manpower we had and still have, really.
Now, something an enterprise like that does take some kind of resource, some sort of capital. Were you able to get any kind of revenue and cash flow from this early on to sustain that? Were there grants
So
available?
yeah, initially because of the accelerator, we had like a kind of like a investment group that invested in us. And then it was like a 2-year deal, but we paid back that note before 2 years in order to kind of we want to kind of keep our, I don't know, our ownership for the most part, if you could. And so we bootstrapped it for a long time. I mean, starting out, the first, couple years, we didn't take salaries. Everything went right back into the company, into buying machinery that we needed, into buying, you have to order so much boxes in order to get a decent quantity. And so all that, it all plays in, and people do not understand some of those limiting, startup things that you have to figure out. But we, because we bootstrapped it for so long, and honestly, we probably even still are bootstrapping compared to some companies, but I am of the person that, you grow slowly and in control. And that's what we have continued to do year over year, is grow in production and grow in sales, and grow at a controlled pace. That's, with mealworms, they can explode even when that has raises insects. You can go, and all of a sudden, boom, they'll take off. And if you don't have the infrastructure in place with that, Gwen's shaking her head, I know she can understand that. If you don't have that infrastructure in place, then you have, a problem on your hands, and then that creates more problems. And so we were, all of us, all along, I've always wanted to grow in a controlled manner, and that's what I have, feel like I've continued to do.
Indeed. Well, one of the things I'm hearing a lot from the agriculture community is a labor shortage issue.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I know when I was speaking to our friend who had the cricket enterprise in Florida, it was difficult to find people who wanted to be in a loud environment that was 95 degrees and high humidity. It just is a place that human
Hmm.
beings don't thrive as much as a cricket would. Did you run into a similar issue there with what your back then and now? I mean, some of the machinery you have, is that for automated growing, or is it just more for packaging?
Well, and where we were at before, we were in a small town of 300 people. So labor was very tight, and it was a town, it was Lindsay, Nebraska, Lindsay Irrigation, the huge irrigation. And so they took up all the labor force in that area, and what they were able to pay for salary, we couldn't match, to be quite honest. And so by moving closer to the suburb, by Omaha, that has helped give us some labor force that we would not have. And I think so far we've been lucky. People have come to us asking to work for us, which is kind of cool. The city we're in has a lot of meat processing plants, a lot of, protein processing, chicken, the whole works, a lot of chicken processing. And, some of those kill plants, they are great, maybe for initial wages, but the conditions are not really awesome. I mean, honestly, probably most of us would not want to work in there very long. And so I have been able to get workforce. I think the key that I'm able to offer that a lot of places don't is flexibility. We have women with children. And so from being a working mom in the past myself, I know how frustrating that was for me when kids are sick and you got to be able to go, and and your employer's saying, no, you can't go, but you really need to go. And so, so one of the things that I offer is flexibility for the women that work with us, that, if they, like, one gal would rather, take a shortened break at the end of the afternoon so she can leave early, pick her kids up from school. And so we try to work hours, have them work hours that works for them. And that has seemed to be, very helpful, for us, is to get employees that way. Maybe we don't offer some of the benefits that some of the bigger companies do, but flexibility is worth a lot sometimes.
Yeah, and that's leading by example too. Good job. So now we got the foundation of the business in place. We have some governance and policies in place. The big curious thing is, what is the market? I mean, who is taking the mealworm offtake? What does that look like? And sort of a secondary question like that, I know Innova, when they partnered with ADM, they were using some of the
Mhm.
heat and the feedstock
Mhm.
there as
Mhm.
a JV. Talk a little about the opportunity that might be there in addition to the markets that are available.
Well, right now, like I said, we are catering to the live market 100%, and we have not been able to meet that demand even yet during peak times. And so we're still striving to get to that. We're at the point where our current site, we've pretty much maxed out. We're very, very close to being maxed out at it. And so I'm already looking at what does 2026 look like, and start planning for that. Do we expand? And if we expand, where does that go to? Where does that look like? Where do you want to go? Our feedstock is with the mealworms is different than what your BSF feedstock is, and just what we feed them is just way different. And so some of those companies have paired up next to a feed source that is right next to them that can parlay right into it. Our if we were to move somewhere close to who would be a great company would be someone that has the grains, because we feed them like the bran and the mids, and it's a dry substrate that they live in for the most part, except for the moisture source we provide them. And so, a mill company that mills the wheat products would be a location where we would, want to be next to if we were to try to get a strategic partner in place for that. And so, that's kind of where we're at. And did I answer your question? I feel like there's part of your question
You
I did
did
not
well,
answer.
did and also the other uses because I know in the past we were looked at lipids, we looked at proteins, emulsifications, and things
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Just in general, where could a mealworm plug in, and what would
Yeah.
the benefit of that be?
Yeah, well, and there's still some interest, I think, a little bit of interest in the food side of it. I mean, I literally had a food guy that reached out to me last night as I was driving, and he's going to a food show in Vegas next month and said, hey, I'd love to partner up with you for these product lines I have in mind. And it's like, yeah, that would be awesome. But for the protein part of it, my colleagues at Insect, I mean, they were able to get, the AFCO approval for mealworm protein to be in dog food. And, they have created some exceptional product lines that are very diverse as far as you can have the meal, you can have like the frozen blocks, the wet mass. You can get the oil off of them, and the oil can be used to, coat different, like especially like kibbles and things like that. And so, there's a lot of different product lines that you can spin off of it. And Insect, through all their research and patents, have developed everything you possibly could utilizing mealworm larvae, and what product lines would potentially feed into not only pet food but also human food as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I have a lot more questions about that too, but that brings up another question in my mind here. And I know that you said don't ask me about science, so I'm not going to get really deep into the science.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I'm
Even though
not,
I just now found out you have a biology degree, so I think you're
but that's a
faking me
long
out
time
there.
ago.
Yeah. But can you describe the life cycle of a mealworm? I just find them
Yeah,
fascinating, and how long do they stay in there, and how many harvests can you get a year, and what stage do you use them at, and for what things? I mean, a live one maybe.
yeah.
Anyway, I'll shut up and let you answer.
Yeah. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? But the beetle, the dark-winged beetle, is where I would like say ground zero, let's say, starts with. And so, the beetles will lay their eggs, and we collect those eggs and we put those eggs in a nursery. And as
Well,
we
let me
start,
stop you right there when you say collect these eggs, because I feed my mealworms flour, and there is no distinction what an egg is and what the flour is. There must be
yeah.
some way for you to get the egg out of there too. They're tiny.
Yeah, they're tiny. So we have screens basically that they're able to lay their eggs through. And if you aren't careful, they can eat the eggs. And so we try to separate them from the where they can easily access them and eat those. So the screens allow them to, with their ability to lay the eggs through the screen. We collect those eggs every week, and then we take those and separate them, and then we put a new base underneath the screens
Another
for
technical
them to lay their
question. I'm
eggs in.
sorry. How long do the eggs last? I mean, is it like eggs on the chicken? You can leave them on the counter for weeks on end, or do they have a, you can't do that?
Well, you will see them. I mean, they will start to hatch. You can see basically movement. I would say if you look really close, in about uh, 3 weeks, you can start to see just barely. And then each week you can see more and more and more and more. And so we keep them in, a certain part of our nursery for a while where you don't really need to feed them moisture because they're so small, they aren't going to hatch. And then, you know, um, in 3 weeks, we feed them just a little bit, 4 weeks more, 5 weeks, and then we start to transport them to a different part of the nursery where then they, it's a long life cycle, to be quite honest. And that is something that, it's interesting. A lot of people are surprised how long the life cycle is. I mean, I figure, depending on the size of the worm, between 2 to 3 months of from when the egg is laid to when we are actually able to sell them. We sell worms, like you talked about the pinhead crickets. We sell them at, real small, kind of mini stage all the way to large. And so it kind of depends on the customers to when we can get those out the door. But the biggest thing that we have to figure out, because we aren't high tech as far as some of the automation, the data, and the systems that you can just keep track of your inventory all the times. We have to kind of keep track of inventory more by, not by computer, but by visual kind of clues that we have and signs that we have of far as when these eggs were laid and when we moved them over. But the hardest thing we have to balance is, you can't sell a mealworm more than once. And so, if you offload too many at the small stage and you don't have enough for the large. And so it's kind of a balancing act to make sure that you have what you need at the final stage. But business wise, it makes a lot more sense to sell them at the younger stage because you have less labor, you have less feed, less hours. And the price is, a way better price at the younger. Plus you can utilize better packaging. We can get double the amount sent out with the packaging. And so that saves cost on packaging, shipping costs, everything. And so, but you have to have them enough to work their way through that, adult stage. Where some companies, I think, when you're only worried about getting them to that really big stage and then harvesting them, you don't worry so much about making sure you don't sell them too soon at the younger stages. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh, totally. And I'm reading a book right now called Flower Confidential about the inside of the flower industry. And you ship them a
Mm-hmm.
little bit young. So by the time they get there, they're ready to
Mm-hmm.
go. And when I think about the mealworm colony that I have, I went to the pet store, Petco or one of those, and
Mm-hmm.
bought the mealworms in the styrofoam container. They were small. So that was probably again
Mm-hmm.
for longevity purposes that they would last
Mm-hmm.
that long until someone like me walked in there. And another thing you just said there about that sense, when you walk in there, you kind of know what needs to be done. That struck me. A friend of mine started a nonprofit of beekeeping for first responders and veterans with PTSD, and she found there was a really neat matchup there because they're so accustomed to taking care of things, to caring for them,
Mm-hmm.
that that have that same level of sensitivity. They walk in and they sense something, and for them, it's
Mm-hmm.
just they're hyper focused on it, and it's a good way for them to have relief. So I just, when you're thinking about workforce development, I put that out there.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I think even my agricultural background has helped in many ways being able to problem solve and to sense when something's not right and to try something. You're going to, if you're in an insect farm and you have an insect invasion, that's really difficult to handle because you can't just like spray and get rid of the problem insect because you kill everything. And so being able, and no matter what, if you're in an insect industry, you're going to have some type of unwanted insect pests that will enter, whether it's with your grain or through, the conditions that you have outdoors that allows them to come in somehow. One thing that's, that I would say that's good about good old frigid Nebraska is that, our very, -6 degree temperatures I woke up to with a -20 wind chill, it gets rid of a lot of insects outside during, several months of the year that we don't have to worry about entering, our facility. Which is kind of nice. But I think that ag background lends itself in many ways to being able to problem solve. Because even like I did entomologist that he kind of wigged out when we had one little kind of biosecurity. And it's like, just wait, what if we tried this and this? And it ended up eradicating the problem. And he was ready, just like, oh, we need to burn the whole building down. It's like, no, we don't need to. Let's figure this out and we can find a solution. And we did. And we found a solution that worked, marvelously. And so I think that helps to just be able to sometimes even MacGyver it, I guess, of sorts, where you don't have a lot of different manpower to do things. So you have to kind of figure it out on your own when you're a smaller business.
Well, you bring up an important topic to me. When I first started raising mealworms, I had a very successful farm. Went on, I don't know how many years, multiple generations. And what wiped me out were mice. Somehow they found it, got in
Oh,
there. Yeah,
mhm.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm sure, in addition to my hatred of mice inside the house and the hatred of what they did to my mealworms,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's a whole host of other pests that you need to be aware of if you're not only a mealworm farmer, but any type of insects as well. And the other question I meant to ask you before about humidity, because I know I don't put any water or moisture at all my mealworms. They get it from the food they eat.
Mhm.
Do you have actual moisture,
Yeah.
excuse me, in their cages? And it also, is there an increased humidity inside where they're being raised right now
Mhm.
too?
Yes, yes, we have different humidity. We have to have different zones from where our beetles, the adults, are at versus where our other larvae are at. And so we try to maintain humidity level 60% or so. If we go much higher than that, it can lend itself to some problems with overheating and mealworms. High heat and high humidity equals high death loss, especially for the larger the worms are, because they actually, little guys actually produce a lot of heat themselves, and especially when you feed them their moisture source, there's extra excitement and activity, and they gather around it. And I don't remember if you remember, one of the things I sent you was, they kind of line up almost like cattle at a feed trough. They go right to that moisture source and they'll congregate there, and they want to camp out on top of it and underneath of it and all around it. And so we have found that if we get up to humidity that's 80%, that's not good for us. It really isn't. It leads to some problems. And we would rather maybe back it off and have maybe a little bit slower rate of growth, maybe a little bit, versus having it super high and having high death loss, because we get a premium for our mealworms. And but with that comes the fact that we send out beautiful worms, I really do. And we take a lot of pride into the customers not having, a bag full of hardly any dead worms. I mean, when we hand inspect each tray before we send it out, and if you have high heat and high humidity, you're going to have high death loss, and that makes it difficult. Machines can only kind of separate a certain percentage of the deads. It seems like it's hard to get all of it separated via machines, and so then that means humans have to pick out the deads, and that's what you don't want. You don't want death loss, and so there's kind of that sweet spot. With Nebraska, summertime we add humidity. I mean, excuse me, wintertime we are adding humidity. Summertime we have to monitor it as well. Sometimes we're dehumidifying the place so it doesn't get so high humidity. Sometimes we have to then add humidity because air conditioning takes out. So, our HVAC is constantly running, whether it's heating or cooling, depending on the season, it seems like. And we have to keep that controlled environment just right.
You spoke the magic words right there. Controlled environment. We're trying to change that narrative to indoor agriculture. CEA has gotten, people forget poultry's controlled environment, but
Mhm.
it's been kind of tainted by the vertical greenhouse folks and all that. And speaking of indoor environment, I'm also a specialist in recirculating aquaculture systems, so growing sort of aquatic
Mm.
protein on land, and they have a term for that early die-off, and it's called a premature harvest. So maybe there's an opportunity there for you to utilize your premature harvest in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, we do actually, at our site, nothing goes to waste. We've found an outlet for everything. And even the premature harvest you talk about, where there's some death loss, that all goes into organic bin and tote. And this person will take any extra feed that we have that's got a high amount of frass, the deads, you might say, any vegetables that are not eaten, consumed when we harvest those worms, those go into this big tote, and he spreads it on his compost pile as a farmer and spreads it on a compost pile, and does wonderful things for his compost pile as well. So, there is there's a good and bad to everything, I guess. Not everything, even death loss can be a positive spin on for someone
Now, does
when
he,
they.
I'm assuming he's a friend and you're just giving this to him. Is there a market for that sort of mealworm frass? I know that,
Oh yeah,
Mike Lynch
yes.
has got the black soldier fly larvae going.
Yeah, yes. No, we sell it as a fertilizer to him. We have it in the super sacks, about 1,000 pounds per super sack. So he grabs the super sacks of the fertilizer, and then he grabs the organic waste. And so we've been fortunate. We have not had any trouble finding a buyer for it. I would love to expand the market of our frass other than just local, but even just local is getting rid of is, they're buying it from me, so I can't complain. But the problem with trying to expand, I mean, people would love the frass, but when they're several states away, the transport costs limit that. And and I've had people say, if you were within 200 miles of me, I would buy all of your frass up, and that trucking just really eats up the, it's hard for them to, the benefit then it becomes a wash, I guess, for them for the price point of it. And so you had mentioned earlier, if you could be next to someone, where would you be at? And so, that would be also the case, to be next to, a end user that would find, a high value need for your frass as well, not only inputs, but a outlet for your outputs as well.
Would you consider doing something other than live mealworms? I mean, in
Would I
terms of using the mealworm itself.
like to dry them? Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, dry them
Oh
or some sort of oil or what have you.
yeah, yeah, or food industry. Like I said, this gentleman that reached out to me last night, definitely I would love to do that. It's just the right now. So if you have, the ratio is like a 3-to-1 ratio. So it takes 3 pounds of live basically to equal 1 pound of dry, because there's 60 some percent moisture. And so, the quantity you have to produce to equal 1 pound of something that's dried is just so much higher, and just not as cost effective. I mean, like I said, for us, we haven't had no problems yet getting rid of everything that we sell. And I continue to expand those markets and to take on strategic customers as we grow. There are some points, because there's some seasonality with some of the live market. And so I have looked into getting those microwave dryers or something to process those. So because people do want the dried product, I mean, 99% of dried mealworms are imported in, probably 99.9% almost at this point are imported in from other countries. And so there's a huge demand for the millions and millions of pounds of dried mealworms that are brought to this country. Um, you just got to be able to, know that when someone creates a site, that initially some of your, expenses are going to be fairly high, not only for the infrastructure, for the controlled environment and all that, but also for the equipment that you need and the time frame it's going to take. You can't just flip a switch and you're going to have, 2,000 pounds of, dried larvae overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to get to that point.
Oh yeah. And I would assume that the frass has a similar water weight, somewhere in the, over 40%, or is it a little bit
No,
drier?
it's less than 10%. So
Oh,
what is
sweet.
what is really cool about mealworm frass is that we had it analyzed, and it was unprocessed as is. And so it's negative. I mean, so it's unprocessed, basically animal manure. And so it tested negative for salmonella, negative for listeria, negative for E. coli, and then negative for the step screening, which is like another type of like E. coli bacteria. And so I think that's really unique, because what other animal would you take their unprocessed manure, cattle manure, chicken manure, whatever, and have it test negative for all those kind of critical bacteria, which is pretty cool. I mean, honestly, when you think about it. So it looks like if you ever have stayed awake at night and wondered what mealworm frass looks like, it's like gold sand is what it looks like. And so it's a unique property, and we've had some people that said don't pelletize it, because that will kill some of the microbial activity that's in it, because you want to keep that microbial activity because that's what lends itself to healthier soil. But yet it's easier to spread when it's pelletized, because you could put in a spreader and have it go out as well. So
I love it.
it's kind of the perfect poo.
Well, speaking of the perfect poo, talk to me a little about who your live mealworm customers are, not specifically, but just broadly. Because when I met with
The
my friend at the
industries.
yeah, when I met with a friend in the cricket industry, she told me that the bearded dragon and specialty reptile industry was about $100 million, and about 50 million was being met by current supply.
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
just, I mean, I remember in the past you were selling to Wild Birds and a few other places like that
mhm.
for inclusion.
Yeah, yes.
I think I can say
So
that.
yeah, initially, our first um customer was in the wild bird industry, and so then that was, and so when I was with that accelerator, you do all these customer interviews, and I mean, we had to find out who even uses a mealworm, right? And so that was one of the things I discovered was the wild bird industry, and of course the feeder insect world, your exotic pets, and small, even some small mammals, like your mice. People who have mice would also could feed them. So we but those are our two main industries right now that we cater to, is the wild bird and the feeder insect, the exotic pet industry.
So as our audience, both here live and those that watch this recording later, go to whatever place they buy their wild bird feed from, what label should they look from, and who should they ask for if they don't see it on the shelf?
Well, when we sell business to business, they put their own, sometimes their own labels on it. And so we aren't able to. We finally have some stickers we're putting on cups now that we sell. So we package them in cups of like 500 count, 1,000 count, and then of bags of 5,000 or 10,000. And so the business to business people, sometimes they're leery to have your advertise on it because they don't want the customer to go directly to us and buy from us. And so, and quite often though, I try to say, hey, depending on where they're at, do you realize you have a store that's closer to you that you might be able to get a higher chance of them arriving safely. When you do the retail business to customer, that is its own nightmare because shipping is just not dependable. Whether it's USPS, UPS, FedEx, there's always something shutting down a hub or weather creating a problem somewhere. And so it's quite stressful. Knowing if they're going to get there alive, DOA. I mean, it's interesting, something that you could probably work hard. Mealworms is a grain pest that people have worked hard and spent a lot of money trying to kill. And then when you ship them to a customer, they just die on their own because the weather isn't quite perfect. And so it's kind of quite frustrating in that aspect that they can be hardy until you want them to be hardy, and then they decide they don't like the temperature somewhere and die on the way.
That sounds like one of those memes, that's for sure. And kind of along, I guess that leads to my next question here. You talked about looking at different geographic areas because I think localized production would certainly support the endeavors that you're doing. I mean, and don't answer any question you don't answer to, but are you looking to maybe have a franchise model or expand yourself or empower others to do it? What is that? What would help you? What would support you?
Yeah, well, looking to expand. I mean, actually in communication with a company in the East. And so looking to expand, and what does that look like? There's a huge market for it. And I want to make sure when you have a company that's not close by, that sometimes things don't always go as planned, and that sometimes employees don't do what you've told them to do, or some critical step is skipped, and then you have issues. And so Wherever I choose to expand to is going to be a place that I want to go to. I mean, clear on, somewhere where it's super cold. I probably not want to, to do that, but someplace that's super hot isn't always good either. And so you have to kind of find that sweet spot between, I don't know, like a temperate area, I guess, that it's good for raising them in, but also a place that I don't mind going to help out and to oversee. But the biggest thing as far as expanding is making sure that you can keep the quality up. Like I said, we get premium prices, but we send a premium product. And so that control factor is something that's very important to me, that the expectations are met not only in the rearing of the little guys, but also in the harvesting and then in the shipping and packaging and we work hard to keep that customer relationship. I mean, it's very important. I mean, we're on people are texting me, calling me, emailing me their orders because they want to make sure it gets through, quickly and on time. And I work with them to say, hey, I think we need to wait to ship them one day because there's a storm coming through here and I don't want them held somewhere. And so we do shipping Monday, Tuesday, 99%, some leftovers on Wednesday, but after that, we don't want to ship and the customers have come to understand because I don't want them held somewhere over the weekend where the temperatures are not ideal, and then have death loss there. But to go back to your question, where would I go? Looking to expand? Yes, I am. And so, right now there's other businesses, competitors that are importing in live mealworms to help meet the demand. And so I know there is, the need is there, which lends itself in some ways to a little bit of a concern because, you know, I I have heard, whether or not that's true or not, but I've heard that, the cricket virus that wiped out a lot of cricket farms, that there's some talk or belief that maybe that came from European insects being brought in. There's a superworm virus that's hit a lot of superworm farms. And I think, there's a company that I talked to, said they think that that might have been brought in from European imports. And so, what is being imported in and what you have to watch for as far as how they can bring down other growers or other people in the industry. And so, because of that, we have not brought in any other mealworms probably to our colony since 2019. We kind of keep growing organically, but most times because I know what we have and I know what I don't want to have, and that is an outbreak of viral outbreak of some kind that brings us down. And so having another site somewhere would be good because things always happen. You have a AC unit that goes out on you July 4th, which happened about, it was sweating bullets there for a while. They got that fired back up. And so another plant somewhere makes a lot of sense because if one goes down, you have got another site that can keep you afloat.
It's almost as if you're reading my questions here that I was going to ask you, led right into the next one so perfectly here. So, understanding what you've done here and the pioneering that you've created within North America for mealworms, there's an international body of insect growers, industry support, and what have you. And recently, within the last few years, an organization was stood up, I assume, to start setting those standards for insects
Mhm.
across the globe. And if I recall correctly on LinkedIn, were you just appointed to one of those board members? And did you recently go to one
Yeah,
of those meetings? And what can you share sort of on the macro level globally about the
yeah.
insect industry?
Yeah, the North American Coalition of Insect Agriculture was, designed in mind to promote insect ag because a lot of people did not know about insects, and it's still a very young fledgling, I would say, industry of many sorts. And within the industry, you kind of have silos. You have your BSF people, you have your cricket people, you have superworm and, mealworms. And so this industry is meant to bring everyone together. Let's bring some of our knowledge, lobbying for the industry as a whole. What do we need to get by? What can we do to try to find markets for frass? Beyond maybe just plants, nourishing the plants and nourishing the soil. How else can we use frass? Recognition from Omri with organic certification. What can we do to propel that forward? But also, getting ready for the big companies that want to export their products to outside the US, but also working on, okay, what's coming into the US, kind of alluding to what I mentioned too, is like, how can we have, my brother was a state veterinarian for years and years and years. So anything that was brought in across, lines from Canada to Mexico, those cattle or hogs, whatever, were supposed to be held to a degree of inspection. So you knew that they were not bringing in something, where it kind of goes back to, different insect species live being brought in can create havoc here on a young industry. And we aren't as big as the cattle or the hogs or the poultry industry, but still something coming in that wiping out a farm, no matter how big or how small you are, is devastating to that person. And so I think, my interest is trying to not only help with, the frass and how can we get that easily, more awareness of the benefits of the insect frass, but also what can we do to help protect the industry so live insects being brought in are not accidentally creating problems for people that have been raising them for years and years here and not wipe them out somehow. So that's why I said I do not want to bring other to grow a different site. We would probably populate with our own, unless I knew for sure that they were tested somehow, they did not have some other issue.
That's a major issue. I spoke to under the past administration one of the heads of biosecurity for the USDA, and I said, "What keeps you up at night?" And he goes, "Mixed meat coming into the U.S." I'm like, "Oh,"
Mhm.
I said, "Well, that's a
Yeah,
hard problem to solve for." And insects
yeah.
themselves. These are the things we don't really think about when we are going through this. Cheryl, I'll leave with this one last question, and then I'll stop the recording and open up for Q&A. If, as our audience is viewing this, what is one thing they can do for you or for the industry that would really be a positive impact, whether for your business or the industry itself?
Well, I think just talking about it in general. I mean, I think, the USDA for a long time was not doing any type of research because they kind of thought the insects industry was just kind of gonna kind of show up and kind of disappear. And then Europe got so far ahead, Europe and Asia, but especially Europe, got so far ahead of the research that they've done. And then the USDA kind of realized, oh, hey, we're kind of behind here. So they've tried to speed up their processing. But I guess, first of all, just talking and awareness about it, to say, have you ever heard about insects? Have you heard about insect protein? Have you heard about the benefits of insect frass, the uniqueness of it? That's number one. And I would say also for, I guess, myself, as far as if are aware of where you think would be a good area to expand in, I would welcome, any and all suggestions with that. I'm always open to what I have found is really interesting, that I continue to learn every week about something I did not know about. And it's kind of like following a trail of breadcrumbs. You never quite know where it's going to take you. And things that I thought I would never consider, now I'm considering, and things I thought was a good idea, I've kind of later realized, oh, maybe not such a good idea. But I'm working with companies on some other products with our frass, and I'm hoping to get to fruition. Keep my fingers crossed on that. That hopefully the next couple of weeks we'll hear that could be a really big market. But I guess just any suggestions or input you can give me based upon the frass situation, knowing what it the positive attributes to it, with the negative bacterial information that I've kind of given you. I think that would be very helpful. Um, and just what, a partner that you think would be a good partner, a strategic partner, I guess, is also, one of the things that we don't have, and I mentioned to you, Andrew, in the email, is that I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher. I have a biology degree, but that was a long time ago. But anyone that you think would be interested in doing any type of research with mealworms or frass, I would gladly do that because we, and I think in some ways the venture capital people that have invested in companies, they've put a lot of pressure on research, which is good and bad, because you need research to get people understanding what these products from these insects can be, what products can be produced, and what's the benefit of those products. But it ends up eating up a lot of money that companies can't always afford to do. And when you're spending a lot of money in research, in the meantime, how you keeping the doors open with getting product out the door as well. So it's kind of a catch-22. I don't know if that makes sense to you at all, but anyone that would be interested in doing any type of, experimental research, I'll gladly send people product lines for that, for them to experiment on.
Outstanding. I think I can think of 4 or 5 right now off the top of my head. And back to your sort of initial point there, I'm very tied into the animal protein sector. I'll be speaking at the Animal Ag Alliance, and they know for a fact that I talk about micro livestock and insects to the leadership of the animal
Yeah,
supply chain. And I'm sure you understand their response to this as well. But just let you
yeah.
know, I'm carrying the flag up there, and one of these
Yeah.
days they're gonna let me do a panel discussion about micro livestock, and you're gonna be my first phone call.
Well, it's so much has been done just recently in the past probably 5 years in the US combined, you could probably have put all together in the last 15 years. And so, we are behind, but we are working on, I've sent some exoskeletons to university to research the exoskeletons and see what could be a use for those skins, that's with the nanoparticles of that, what could that lead to? I'm waiting to hear back results from that as well. So, it might be something that sometimes the exoskeletons is going to be more of value than, the actual mealworm itself, the animal itself, just for the skins.
I've heard it said for many reasons too, not just for the ones that we think about. I mean, there's a lot of sort of
Mhm.
other ways to go. But Cheryl, I want to thank you so much. This has been a long time coming. I am so excited that I was able to get the deep dive and understand the industry from your perspective. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate everyone that showed up. I really do.